High-Low Bro Show. Cries and Whispers and The Stepfather.
Hi there, this is Richard Ryan, high art junkie and pop culture aficionado. I am here to give you the highbrow perspective.
And my name is Garrett Chaffin-Quiray, and my job is to give a lowbrow connection to what movies might be, right in the gut and the belly.
So you and I have been having this conversation for 25 years now, and I think what we're trying to do is connect our mutual love for both the high cultural elements and the more popular elements of film, and show how very mysteriously and profoundly some great art films that, if you're a movie fan, you probably only have seen in a graduate film class, connect to films that you watched with your girlfriend or your boyfriend at 12:30 in the morning on Showtime.
And the point is, for me, that my on-ramp into thinking about movies seriously was the sort of video store gross-out comedies with rip-away bras that first got me excited about movies in the 1980s, only to realize they're, in fact, quite a lot more serious than that.
Rip-away bras and enormous explosions and serious amounts of automatic weaponry.
And of course, wherever possible, the utensilization of kitchen supplies to murder people.
Kitchen supplies or garage tools. You could use various kinds of auto mechanical parts.
Good.
I would just also like to say that although I think that there is this clear distinction in the critical literature and in the ways that people talk, not just about films, but other art forms, between high culture and low culture, I think we both understand those distinctions, but I don't think we feel like we're bound by them. And I think the ways that those two cultures cross over is really interesting. And to say, how does a film that was meant purely to entertain you create these kind of more interesting, complex ideas? And then how does a film that was meant to be a great work of art actually just really, kick you in the gut?
So as a little sidebar for you folks listening, biographically, I met Richard after a screening when I was in graduate school, and we were trying to make a time to connect with one another, and it overlapped with a screening of a movie that I can no longer remember its title. But we met, in particular, because we agreed that the movie we had just been watching in a graduate school seminar was not very good, and that there was something down the street that could be better. A few drinks later, we began a friendship. And so that very idea of how you collapse the high-low distinction as a worthwhile way to understand your pleasure and yourself has been a long-standing note of how we've gotten along with one another.
And I think what we're going to attempt in this podcast is to tie our love of high and low film culture together and talk about these kinds of crossovers to make you aware of art films out there that you may not have gotten around to seeing because you think, wow, that sounds really heavy and boring. It's like three hours of people talking in some kind of Eastern European language about really deep stuff. But actually, it's quite a good and entertaining film. And then there's the kind of midnight trash stuff that you can actually learn a lot from, and it give you larger insights into your culture, into various ideas. So, starting with this week's lowbrow entry in our constellation of films worth watching, we have The Stepfather, which, Garrett, I had never even heard of before you suggested that I watch it. And now, having watched it, I think it's a terrific, really well-made film of its sort. So tell me why you chose that one.
Well, the reason for this is partly strictly a personal thing, and that is I was introduced to this movie at around age 16, hadn't yet left high school, with an uncle who's a Vietnam-era veteran, kind of a crazy dude who was really into renting lots of things or else borrowing, in quotes, borrowing as in taking, videos wherever possible. And on a spring break, I think it was my junior or senior year in high school, visiting him, he pulled off the shelf this movie and said, "You're going to love it." My parents would have objected, and they asked me to maybe not watch that, but I was with my uncle, so it was permissible stuff. I became quite fixated on what this kind of terrible slasher movie could kind of be. And roughly at the same time,
you were watching it on VHS?
VHS. So
Yeah.
it was a very poor quality thing that I think came from the equivalent of an Albertsons or Vons or a Safeway and its 99-cent wall at the local grocery store. We watched it repetitively until it was required due back so as to avoid
over
late
and
fees.
over again?
Yeah,
Really?
yeah. During this one break, which was mixed up with eating popcorn, having watermelon, and talking about movies. But the thing that got my attention, this was a college-educated person, a graduate school-educated person, a retired military person doing his weekend rounds. And he was saying to me that this movie, though we can agree is kind of awful because your parents don't want you to watch it, is still speaking to us, you and me, kid. We're going to have a good time, and we did. Now, the movie's haunted me ever since because it was fundamental on that basis for being a peeling away of what's possible when you just look at something that's pure genre, a slasher movie of its kind. And at that point, I was well-versed in Friday the 13th and Halloween and various of their spin-offs and rip-offs and like things that were coming through my local video store. So the Stepfather roots from the fact I bonded with my uncle in an unexpected way against the permission of my parents when I was underage to see an R-rated movie, which was all by itself very exciting. And I enjoyed myself. I had a very thoroughly good time and recommended this movie to others for the next couple of years.
I mean, when you think about Stepfather and you compare it to something that gets an R rating these days, like Hostel,
yeah.
I mean, it's not even remotely in the level.
It's definitely bracketed in its moment. It's a hard R for 87, which is when it comes out. It's arguably the kinds of things you would see in an episode of Law and Order on TV through NBC's broadcast network. But in its moment, and because I was impressionable enough to be exactly sort of ready for its targeting as an audience member that this thing is aimed at, it has nudity, it has violence, it has a guy with a split personality, it's got odd sort of faces of what America might be. And that's what caused me to pick this, to kick off this idea of high, low, and a comparative movie situation.
We should talk at some point about, as we explore high culture versus low culture, about how ratings are very important for low cultural films. So whether you get a G rating, whether you get a PG rating, whether you get an R rating, for the big studios, and even for small independent studios, makes an enormous amount of difference for their audience and their marketing campaigns and how they position the film. You never think about that with art films. The idea of what it's rated just doesn't
because
count
it's
for the
meant
most
to be art, have a higher elevation, regardless of whatever you're going to meet on screen. But I have to tell you, I agree with that very strongly because this was also a moment when I was uncovering the whole market that was the lower half of a double feature back in the golden days of old Hollywood, but the movies that were direct-to-video, which are now the kinds of things we stream commonly that are originally produced by Hulu and Amazon and Netflix and the like. But in the middle 80s, you would go to the video store and see a whole bunch of things that were kind of off-brand that were frequently not rated because there was no reason amount of campaign to stuff it through the MPAA and figure out that it's an R-rated movie. In fact, the not rated category was exactly what I looked for with friends, hoping that we would see gnarly stuff. One good solid thing just to know, to set a foundation, the gist of the movie, to refresh you, Richard, in case you don't remember, is that we've got a guy who serially gets himself involved with widows, marries them until something proves dissatisfying, and then he murders them and their children.
I just remember the shower scenes. That's
totally. And at certain points, you glimpse people in their domestic lives, including disrobing to hop in the shower, which is, of course, a reason why a young person might gravitate to the movie.
You might watch these movies, yeah.
And the snafu that develops is that he's murdered his most recent family when the movie begins, is getting himself involved with a new woman named Susan who has a lovely daughter named Stephanie. Stephanie's kind of wise to the fact that our lead character, Jerry, played by Terry O'Quinn, Jerry doesn't seem quite right. He's so straight-laced and so masked up, she doesn't trust him, but she does recognize that her mother, Susan, seems to really love Jerry. Slowly, she sleuths her way towards understanding that, in fact, Jerry could be an awful, terrible person. Simultaneously, a brother of a former woman he killed is hunting for him. And it all comes to a head in the house that he lives in with Susan and Stephanie until we believe he has been killed to conclude the movie. Believe he's been killed because it spawns sequels, which I don't think got theatrical releases, but went right to that straight-to-video wall that a dork like me rented in the late 1980s and early 1990s. And that's the gist of what I think the movie's story is. But there's a lot around that story that's worth thinking about.
again, I had never heard of this movie because I don't spend as much time prowling the movie racks at Walmart as
right,
or before that, whatever
at
whatever
Blockbuster Videos. Yeah,
right,
boy,
right. So I never even heard of The Stepfather before, and then you recommended it to me, and I take your recommendations very seriously, and I watched it and I said, this is a really efficient, well-made movie of its sort. Everything kind of works, even though not everything makes sense in it, right? Here's the one thing that I thought a lot about and doesn't necessarily work for me about Stepfather, and tell me this. Terry O'Quinn's, who became famous in Lost, where I think he actually may have won an Emmy or two. There is this factor which I call the Jack Nicholson factor, and this refers to Jack Nicholson's very controversial performance in The Shining, right? Where you need to believe that lots of people believe the guy is completely normal, but in fact, it's kind of obvious to certain viewers that he's insane from the beginning.
Instantly, you are aware that he's a goofball.
And especially having watched the film twice now, I just go, no, there's no way that any sensible, sane woman would marry this guy and think that he was completely normal.
Let me have a double response. In the first instance, we do meet this woman, Susan, who's deeply enthralled with this man who calls himself
played by
Garrett,
the gorgeous Shelley Hack.
that is conventionally beautiful.
Yeah, sculpture.
And that's how she would have been cast, based on the reputation. Later in the piece, we watch Jerry seduce and make ready the next woman he's going to go involve himself with once he has decided he's going to kill Susan. And for both of these scenes, the thing that now strikes me as a little not just a little, totally silly, is that, one, anybody who survived the death of a spouse, in this instance, it's a woman surviving the death of a husband who finds a new fellow's interest so exciting, would almost immediately and deeply fall in love with this person, because both women act that way. Oh, Jerry, you're the answer, or what have you. That goes against my lived experience. The people don't do that. They're more cautious with their mourning, and of course it's a convention required for how this movie needs to wrap up its third act. The other thing that strikes me now as I review my memory of the movie as a teenager and seeing it now as an adult who's a good deal older, the reason why I think that Jerry works for me and Terry O'Quinn is good in this part is he resembles the kind of caricature of proper adult male life and adulthood that I felt I saw in the fathers of my friends growing up, who would, on the one hand, put on a good face of this is the way you're a dad, while I would hear the stories from my friends of how their fathers actually behaved when nobody was watching, which was less guarded, more overt, a little more bombastic, sometimes often drunken, or more vulgar, or all of the things that lack polish. Jerry's interaction with everybody in the movie is always hinged. And when he becomes unhinged and demonstrates his internal madness, and there are a couple of sequences in the movie that do this.
The scene where he sees the newspaper report about his previous crime, and that's how Stephanie, his stepdaughter, discovers just how crazy he is, right? He sees this and he goes down into the basement where she happens to be hiding out, and he goes into this complete psychotic, sociopathic rant, and she's watching from the shadows, and she realizes, oh my God, he really is.
He's not just a little bonkers like I thought. Yeah. He's fully crazy.
Right.
I mean, if you can remember the scene in the Fellowship of the Ring when Smeagol is at war with himself, you get the matches.
Yes, the argument between. Yeah.
It's exactly that scene, but 15 or 20 years before that. But the same dynamic is at play. He's wearing the mask for the upstairs, but has descended into the basement. There's a lot of obvious symbolism in that. To unwind himself and come unglued, feeling that he's safe and contained within the womb of being in a basement. He's not, and he's being viewed by his stepdaughter, who's already a little hinky about how this guy behaves. So those two notes strike this viewer from the distance of time, remembering what I thought when I was 16 as agreeably strange things, which agreed with how I felt a lot of the adults around me were behaving, putting on an artificial face to deal with the likes of me, because you're supposed to behave well around the friends of your children who come to the house, and yet believing that they were lying. Jerry's not doing that because we're privileged to watch him when he's rehearsing himself, changing his looks, coming unglued.
Most critics and I would say this is almost universal, regard The Shining as one of the monuments of 20th century cinema. I mean, it's commonly regarded as just an exceptionally good film. Stephen King is notorious for saying it's one of his least favorite versions of his film, and he says it because of Jack Nicholson's performance, where from the very beginning you don't believe that this is a perfectly normal, decent man who, he's had a drinking problem, he's gone through some issues, but then he gets into a haunted hotel that literally drives him insane. But he was fine before. Whatever his issues were, they were normal human issues. It's the hotel, it's the overlook that drives him
But
insane.
As I think about when you first see the family driving up to the overlook for his, I guess, final interview or get the keys, because
I think he's already had his interview. Yeah,
he's wooden. He's very, very closed.
Yeah,
and it's strange because by that point in 1980, we were well versed in what Nicholson could do on a screen.
I think we were. Yes,
and we're waiting 2 hours for that to jump off in the latter half of the movie. Well, let me pause and offer this soundbite, which explains a piece of how Jerry presents himself.
I hope you don't think what I'm going to say is pretentious. I sell houses. That's my job. But sometimes I think it's more than that. Sometimes I truly believe that what I sell is the American dream.
As you've just heard, Jerry has this intense belief in the family, in the home, its value as something to uphold, to struggle for, and to treasure. And of course, at every turn, he's bombarded by the fact that the lives he has inhabited several times over with different families don't ever quite live up to the standards that he holds for himself in his internal madness. So a question shows up whether the women folk in this story are worth very much. Because Susan, the woman he's married to in the present narrative of the story, can't see through the fact that he's a mad person, whereas Stephanie, the daughter, that much younger, seems to know that something's not quite right. So I ask you, what does this movie suggest about what is important inside of a family's life?
And she, Susan, the wife and the stepfather, has to get relatively late in the movie where Jerry's behavior gets totally off the scale. I mean, literally, it's that moment toward the end where he begins beating her.
Hodgkins, what's to get wrong?
What did you say?
Who am I here?
Jerry.
Jerry Blake. Thank you, honey.
She finally realizes exactly who she is, but it kind of suggests that a middle-aged woman, even if she does look like a
much
cover
younger
girl
person,
like Shelley Hack,
yeah,
is like just so desperate to be married that she's willing to accept somebody who has certain odd characteristics that might suggest sociopathology.
And she doesn't seem to have a defined career outside of the home, and being a woman who formerly was married, was widowed, and now is remarried, that is the job she has. And to wear clothing and deliver meals and try to figure out a way to get Stephanie and Jerry to get along. That's her job, which isn't a particularly notable or it's not a very good job in a lot of ways. And there's an important scene when we do watch Susan and Jerry go into the bedroom to make love, and it's a little odd because she seems more interested and more capable, let's say. He seems more reserved, a bit more shy, so there's something deeply, I want to use the word advisedly, but there's something closeted about the way that Jerry understands the world. On the one hand, he's capable of mass murder. On the one hand, he's capable of sexual intimacy. But he doesn't seem to have access to what motivates him to behave in any of these ways.
No, those are all great points. And what's interesting in that scene where Susan and Jerry are making love is, of course, that and this is an important moment early in the film, that Stephanie is in the next room listening to her mother and her stepfather make love, and it really obviously upsets her. It's this kind of Freudian primal scene moment, to use the Freudian term, right, where you confront the fact that your parents
have
are
an
having
intimate
sex.
life.
Yeah,
right,
exactly. And that's an important part of her being alienated from Jerry, going, why is this guy who I'm already kind of weirded out about having sex with my mother.
And the way he conducts himself as a romantic partner lacks the sticky quality of being attractive. Now, Terry O'Quinn's not a bad-looking dude. He's tall, he's thin, he's fit-looking, he's got nice eyes. He's basically a handsome guy. He's stock footage, handsome, healthy-looking American male. But his magnetism doesn't come from any of that. He's much more interesting when he wants to murder everybody because he has somehow or other assembled himself into the calm of just, I'm going to do today's work.
He's edgy. That's what draws you in.
Because he finally seems flesh and blood just a little bit. There's also a later scene in the movie, you might recall, when we watch Stephanie return home with her boyfriend. And Jerry has this just hysterical jump away from their having a kiss at the door before she comes home to believing that means they must be just having sex in a park and talking about how she's a slut and a whore, and he just becomes uncorked. And for some reason, nobody has big warning whistles that go off saying that something's goofy about that young people can experiment with kissing at the end of a night's evening and not necessarily be in the mix of a deep physical romance the way that more adult people might be.
Stephanie, the daughter, she has a romantic interest in high school, and they have this very sweet and fairly innocent relationship, and yet Jerry reacts very badly to that. It's as though he needs to sexually control all the women in his family.
And I sort of feel as if one of the deeper structures of the movie's set of themes and what gets its plot moving, we don't know a whole lot about the previous family that he murders in the opening scene of the movie. And we don't know exactly what the family he begins to try to gravitate towards at the end of the movie, the next family after he murders Susan and Stephanie. But we can say that he does want control. That seems to be his erotics. That seems to be his sense of power and authority. That seems to be what his manhood is all about. The ability to control others. And the instant that can no longer be done safely, he just murders them. And etch-a-sketches his whole life, takes on a new physical presence, new wardrobe, cuts his hair, puts in contacts, whatever it is, takes up a new job to find a new set of people he can mold. And if they don't do what he wants, he'll just murder them too.
Is the stepfather in some ways the last gasp of baby boomer post-war patriarchy, where you're seeing a guy who seems like the perfect dad and who he's a real estate salesman.
He's an earner. He's a giver, a maker of communities.
And he turns out that he's actually a psychopath, but although the daughter realizes that a series of women who he marries or are ready to marry him don't realize that, and it's because they're so desperate to have a male earner, a male wage earner as part of their family.
The desperation does sort of gin up. And now that you've mentioned the boomer thing, which I hadn't put as my frame of reference, it is important to realize that that's exactly where Jerry would be. Somebody probably born in the middle to late 1940s with a slightly younger wife, given some of the references that she makes, with a kid who was very solidly born around 1970-ish, who's part of a new generation. But that also points out the fact that as a stepfather, he hasn't actually sired these children through biology. He only makes a family by grabbing hold of somebody else's, you could say, leftover through death, and makes them his own. He's kind of, he's a predator, that's for certain.
He's a predator and he's a parasite.
He's a parasite, that's the word, yeah. That may be ultimately what the stepfather's telling us. Now, I come from a family that had a stable nuclear household with parents who never divorced, but virtually every one of my close friends growing up did not have that luxury. And the notion that a stepfather would come in and murder the family was certainly a strain that I observed beneath the lives of my peer group as a person coming of age. Not that they were subject to terrible violence in the home. At least I'm aware of.
I just have to say that I came from a broken family, although my biological parents were boomers. They broke up when I was young, and the arrival of my stepfather was not quite as cataclysmic as it was in this movie.
Right.
But if I shot my own movie called The Stepfather, it would be equally grim and unpleasant.
Well, there's another recent movie that has a stepfather sequence in it, and that's Boyhood, the Linklater movie from a few years ago.
Which I have not seen yet, which is supposed to be terrific.
It is kind of a rad ride, and I do suggest it, but it has a very memorable sequence when Patricia Arquette's character, Olivia, I think is her name, goes through a series of relationships. A few of them are marriages that bust up in divorce. A few of them are just men that she's involved with across 12 years of her young adulthood. But one of these men is very much like Jerry. He seems to be an earner, seems to have a career, he's got a nice house, but he's a terrible drunk. And so as he drinks, he becomes more dissolute and incapable of being the warm human that you hope that she's going to find for herself. And eventually, she peels back her limit and leaves him. But it becomes a very memorable sequence on screen when you watch that happen. So it's the most benevolent version of a terrible stepfather experience that I can think of in recent American movies, whereas this movie is one of the worst case scenarios.
So I just want to say for our listeners out there in podcast land that the reason why we chose these two movies and why we paired them was because we thought they were both about family dynamics. Although The Stepfather and Cries and Whispers seem like very, very different movies, in fact, there are certain kinds of commonalities, and they are about how families come together and how they form and what kind of interrelationships get established among the members of those families.
So let me ask a question to set up a segue into Cries and Whispers, and that is, in The Stepfather, there is a memorable sequence when Jerry builds a birdhouse that he erects in the backyard on a very tall pole. The concluding image of the movie is Stephanie and Susan having survived Jerry's final attack. They tear down this very same house. They break the thing that Jerry was trying to make.
Great visual image. One of the nicely done, well executed visual pieces of symbolism in the movie, I thought.
And it's very clear. It's a good set of images. It's well composed. It's got all of the scoring issues that you need. It's also without dialogue. Nobody is commenting, hey, look at the house that Jerry built that the ladies are taking down. We see that, and it communicates quite a lot. Now, the segue is, the whole of Cries and Whispers takes place in this gigantic estate, which is its own kind of little oddly constructed birdhouse. So an opening question about Cries and Whispers, before maybe we backpedal and describe the movie, is what's the value of houses, the home? What does that mean in Cries and Whispers? And maybe if you can take up with how the house and the home are portrayed physically in The Stepfather to move us over into Ingmar Bergman's world, that would be a good place to take us.
The idea of real estate, the idea of home, the idea of where you live is crucial to them. And the idea that the environments that we inhabit shape and constrain our thoughts and the effect our interrelationship with the people that they share those homes with is very important. Now, in The Stepfather, Jerry, it turns out he's a real estate salesman. Quite strikingly, a lot of the shots in the film are of these kind of nice-looking Seattle suburban houses. All right. Now, moving to Cries and Whispers, the high film in our high-low panoply of films, it's not just a nice suburban home. It's spectacular, and it turns out it's a famous castle in Sweden. It's called the Taxinga Nagby Castle, if I'm saying its name correctly. It's on the Swedish historical record of places. But Bergman and his great cinematographer, Sven Nykvist, went to a lot of trouble to get that location for the shooting. And the castle, the manor in which Cries and Whispers is set, becomes this almost like enormous skull in which the entire action, it's this headspace where the very narrowly constrained action of Cries and Whispers occurs. There aren't a lot of sets, right, in Cries and Whispers. It's almost all interior. There are one or two very key outdoor scenes, but because, like so much of Bergman, especially later Bergman, it's about interior psychological space. The fact that it's all set indoors is a very important part of the film.
One of the things that technically got my attention as I watched it, because this is one of those movies that's, hugely reputed. I've known about this movie for 30 years but never saw it, and finally got around to it on the basis of this experience. And what I noticed, which felt very of today, is the use of the camera not just to frame places, to see a large drawing room with people dressed in extraordinary clothing with sumptuous fabrics draped across the wall, but the way that the camera would subtly shift in a single take towards a character who was unwinding in some way and exposing part of their interior self, rather than relying on editing to portray those facts. There are old ways to think about that in film theory practice, but the fact is, they put a camera where it needed to be and then let the actors do their work and tried to make sure that it framed them as tightly or as far away as necessary in order to make their interior lives possible to interpret because they don't say a lot. Not only is it in Swedish and we have to read the subtitles, which I know is a drag for some viewers, the dialogue is very often not describing very interesting stuff. It's often, what are you having for dinner? What did you do last night? I don't feel good about the weather. There are exceptions to that, but it is largely not terribly insightful dialogue that instead lets us enjoy watching these very, very good women performers unpack themselves.
Can I just say, I just need to say here, because this is a film about high culture and versus low culture, and Bergman notoriously has a reputation of being a boring director.
Yeah.
You'll hear undergraduates say in film class saying, I know I'm supposed to watch Wild Strawberries or Hour of the Wolf or Cries and Whispers.
Or Seventh Seal, or name your title.
But he's so pretentious and he's so boring.
Yeah.
To me, that tells me you're not interested in human nature. What's going on with human psychology? If you're interested in that, I think Cries and Whispers is mesmerizing. If you're not, then I'm going like, well, then what you're saying is that you don't care about people's interior lives and you don't care about their thought processes. And I don't get that. So I think that one of the things that separates high culture and low culture, and we can discuss this as we go forward, is it's interior versus exterior action, right? It's car chases and gunfights and explosions and you like crazy sex in weird places versus people just talking to each other about what they're feeling.
A good example, something that really struck me, when you watch a movie, sometimes it washes over you in the escapist joy of its fantasy and you forgot you even saw it by the next day. Whereas sometimes little images, sounds, or scenes, characters, they stick to you and you can still remember them days, weeks, months, years later. The thing that stuck with me about Cries and Whispers, the lead character nominally is a woman named Agnes who we believe is suffering from uterine cancer. She's dying. And her sisters and her maid have gathered around her in the ancestral home of this family of women to see her off into her death. This includes the foppish men that surround these women, whether they are spouses or ex-boyfriends, a doctor, a local priest, etc. And in the end, of course, Agnes does expire, and there are things that happen on the basis of that. There's a lot of recollection and some back and forth achronological stuff.
There are two crucial flashback scenes, but the actual course of the movie takes place in the matter of what might be a week, 2 weeks. It's very, very short. Yeah.
And I believe the opening scene, if I'm remembering it properly, is of this woman stricken by cancer, Agnes, as she awakens, opening her eyes, adjusting her senses, but also recovering her sense of pain after having what we presume was some form of rest in the night. And she begins to use her lips to sort of create sounds that aren't really quite audible. She starts to move her body, and that's when the other caregivers, her sisters and her maid, begin to awaken themselves and come to her aid.
However, the opening scene that you're describing is crucial, and it, in a very odd way, parallels the opening scene.
It does, well, you're right.
Otherwise, so famously, and critics often note this, who are sensitive to these kinds of structural matters in a film, the first 10 minutes of Cries and Whispers, both of the name of which suggests that you're going to be hearing sounds, hearing Cries and Whispers, right? Are silent.
Right.
There's no dialogue in the first 10 minutes of Cries and Whispers. There's no dialogue in the first 7 minutes of The Stepfather, and I only realized that after going back to watch. But my point is that for a film which says that it's going to be about various kinds of expressions and interactions between people, the fact that the first 10 minutes are in silence and you see Agnes, as you say, waking up, realizing that in fact she's dying, she goes to the window, she pulls back the curtains, she looks out, and this look of despair covers her face, and she realizes, because she's realizing at that moment that the fact that the outside world is all out there, that nature and natural beauty is out there, that will give her no relief from her suffering. She is entirely caught inside her own body at that point.
We watch her acknowledge the fact that she realizes everything will continue on without her, and that's sad. Deeply sad and painful. And still she's trapped inside of herself, watching herself disintegrate and go through the pain and cycle of a body that's unwinding. And she never once comments on any of this, nor does anybody else in any direct fashion.
Since I'm the highbrow member of the pair, I get to cite the fact that toward the end of his life, Nabokov was very sick and dying, and his son walked in and found him looking out the window, weeping because he was saying the world, it's so beautiful, and I'm losing all of it.
Right.
And Nabokov loved the natural world. Famously, he was a amateur lepidopterist. He studied butterflies and loved the natural world. And I think that's the moment you see with Agnes, of somebody who looks out and sees the natural world and realizes she's never going to have access to it again because she's dying.
So let me pause for a second, because I'm having this little brain fart. And it's saying to me that something that's distinct about this movie, which is often distinct about high culture products, whatever they may be, is their unconventional structure, the way they deliver their particular story. So for a moment, consider the distinctions between the completely linear, totally chronological experience of the Stepfather, which is clear, understandable, and it sews itself up in 90 minutes, versus the achronological, non-linear, thematically loose, and aesthetically strange experience of watching Cries and Whispers. And here's the way that thought bubble occurred to me. That while looking at we would call it the album art, right? The DVD cover for this movie, the way that you would go find it at a bookstore or a fine movie retailer, the way the poster looks, it presents the 4 lead women figures all in white in a garden. And when you complete the movie, you realize that's the final sequence of
that
the
is
movie.
the coda.
And it's not clear if that image is actually part of the narrative experience of this story world or a fantasy. And if it is a fantasy, whose fantasy it belongs to, because there are multiple presentations in the piece of different people's memories and psychological fantasy and need to express themselves. So,
I would say it's clear that the coda actually is Anna's memory. The final shot is of Agnes healthy. It's the first time that you have seen her, the actress playing Agnes, not in death makeup, not with huge dark circles, where she looks young and beautiful and healthy,
and she's
like the other
on her
sisters.
own power, right?
And you see the 3 sisters with their faithful servant, who is clearly part of the quartet, right? It's the 3 sisters, but Anna is very much a part of their psychological contingent. And then you see them sitting together at the end, and I believe the final shot is of Agnes's face. You see her saying, "This is perfect."
Right,
and
it's a final remark, right?
It's a memory. It's a recurrence of a period in time that these women had together, where they really were a cohesive family. They weren't this broken, dying, fragmented wreck, which they're portrayed as for most of the film.
So you view it as an actual take from the chronology of this family unit before the present action of the movie's story itself, of illness and of death. You're viewing it as part of that story world. It's built into it as a diegetic experience versus a fantasy, or you.
It's not a fantasy. It's a true memory.
Okay.
I don't think it's a recovered or a fabricated memory that someone is having. I think it's an actual memory of a moment that the sisters had when they were all younger and they were at peace, and they're outdoors. They're not trapped inside.
Right, they're not in that big house.
They're not in the big haunted house.
Yeah.
And
I'm super glad you used the phrase haunted house, because
Yes.
one of the lingering experiences I had thinking about this movie is that while it's draped in obscenely red scenography, they really went after the color red in this piece, and it's often talked about that way. The sense of dread and unpleasantness that I feel is around every potential corner, and the way that everybody is so very, very closed off from their feelings of deep distress over Agnes's illness, it reminded me very heavily of a Hammer haunted house movie from the 60s. You name your title, it fits in with that, from all of the things that sort of go on, waiting for the awful result of death.
there is so throughout the course of the main body of the narrative, if you can call it that makes up Cries and Whispers, a scene will come to an end. And it very much is a scene. It's an exchange or a moment between characters. There will be a close-up on a character, usually, in fact, I think it's always one of the sisters, or Anna's face, and then there is a crossfade bleed out to red, where the entire frame fades to red. It's as though the film is hemorrhaging.
Yeah.
And then it goes to the next scene. And that happens again and again. And it's one of the underlying motifs of the film is that
dissolve into a color.
You dissolve into you totally the entire screen. You have a close up of one of the sister Anna's faces. The entire screen fills with red, as though a blood vessel has just burst, and then you go to the next scene.
And often that is used to mark the memory of the character whom we are focused on. So we then are exploring whatever insight they have outside of the closing days of Agnes's life, which is basically the story of the piece, which gives it its jagged achronological feel that requires a little bit of sleuthing. We do have to put together these puzzle pieces and grasp a better understanding of how all of them fit together. As an example, when we first meet Anna, we find her in her room, presenting herself for the day's work ahead of her, putting up her hair, putting on her dress, and we pointedly look at her looking down into a cradle that is empty, marking the fact that she's lost a child. And while we don't get the entire story of that, we know that that figures prominently in her experiences as a person devoted to this household. For whatever reason, these sisters helped her through that experience because it happened under the watch of this house.
And we don't know how it's hard to imagine because she seems to be so totally devoted and absorbed within the life of the sisters. It's hard to imagine how Anna got pregnant.
Right.
You almost, and this would be very typical of a servant, right? Did one of the masters of the house
take advantage
of her, and is that how she got? So it was probably as a servant girl or servant woman would often have. Was it an illegitimate child? And that's very typical with Bergman. He'll leave enigmatic references to something that have happened off narrative, outside the frame of the film, and you're just supposed to guess what that might have been.
And one of the irritations that goes along with that line of making creative work is it invites us to do interpretive work on our own behalf. Because
Bergman is a genius at that, at giving you just enough clues in his film to make really interesting interpretations about why certain things are suggested in the film. But they put just enough information in the film to let you, the viewer, work with it, but they don't tell you exactly what's happened, and they don't tell you how to react to it or how to interpret it. They let you you go with it.
So let's go with a couple of gnarly scenes in this movie which need to be addressed and said out loud. And one is the fact that Anna, on I think 2 occasions, bares her breast and pulls Agnes to her bared breast in an image that is very much like nursing, literally nursing a baby, having known that Anna has lost a child. That's resonant. Knowing that Agnes needs sustenance because she's suffering under the weight of cancer is powerful. It's also not unlike Mary and Jesus imagery we find in sculpture and in paintings throughout the studio
and
arts.
Bergman's on record as saying that the final image of Anna cradling the dead Agnes in her arms was modeled on the Pietà.
Right.
And
it's a striking image, both because there's a deeply homoerotic layer to the experience of watching that scene. It's done in long take. It's unexpected. And we know that the sisters can't be that close to their deceased and dying sister before that.
There are 2 scenes. Anna and Agnes are very physically intimate, and both scenes suggest this is something that they're familiar with. So that brings us to the interesting question, which has often been asked and actually rather heatedly argued about this very important film in Bergman's canon. Where is it a feminist film? Do you like these women? Are you supposed to sympathize or empathize with them? Do you feel that the film actually has a sympathetic view of women? That moment that you're describing, which is the first moment that suggests that there may be something more than just a relationship of a servant comforting an employer.
This is a beloved losing her match.
When Anna opens her shift and bares her breast and pulls the dying Agnes's head to her breast, I just think it's a stunning moment. but it's also rather erotic too, and it suggests that their relationship is more than just financial or economic or master-slave relationship, that there's something about Agnes and Anna's interactions with each other that well before the start of the film have been of a rather different nature.
Right.
And so that's a very profound moment.
There's another big one in the other one I alluded to before, and that is the character of Karen, or Karin. She's a cold fish, to put it in one way of thinking. She's married unhappily. All of the women seem to have unhappy relationships.
She's frigid. And
it begs the question why on a couple of levels, because as we've said, there is already the presence of a homoerotic, if not a homosexual relationship sort of embedded in the works of this story. But that seems to be mirrored in the fact that the other characters, Maria and Karen in particular, can't exhibit their sisterly affection for one another in a physical sense. Karen pulls away from touch. She cannot stand to be embraced, coddled, comforted, or assisted in any way, and she is overtly suicidal and describes wanting to end her life, wanting to take her life, wanting to do herself harm.
She doesn't like men. She doesn't like women. She doesn't like humanity as a rule. And she finds that she frankly finds any kind of human interaction disgusting and repulsive. It's excruciating to her, and you kind of wonder how
watching her then watch her sister's plumbing expire and kill her. She has no sympathy for it because it's all just ugly and brutal and gross.
Karen and Marie both have very different reactions to Agnes's dying and death, but they're alike in the sense that neither of them can really access that. None of them can have that closeness and that comforting relationship with their sister that Anna has.
Here's a loopy connection back to Jerry with the stepfather. These sisters, Maria and Karen, know what they are supposed to do, but they don't have the internal emotional life or fortitude to actually perform it, nor does Jerry. They can control what they look like, how they dress themselves, the way that they cause a room to be properly shrouded or unshrouded. The words that they say are appropriate, but they don't have the weight of being true. For Jerry, it's because he's a homicidal crazy person who wants to destroy suburban America. But for these sisters who are extraordinarily wealthy, observing the death of one of their own, what it mostly ends up being, as you think about the movie story once it's done, is the two surviving sisters are waiting for the third who's about to die so they can sell the ancestral home and move on in their lives because they find it all frankly unpleasant and boring. Death sucks. And they'd like it to be over with as soon as possible. Versus Anna, who's quite devoted to a fallen friend at a minimum, potentially a wifely figure, and is suffering through the weight of the way the whole movie kind of works. And around the edges, we have these terrible men who aren't worth anything except judging Anna in great harshness and unkindness at a moment when all of their lives are in transition.
There are three men of any significance in Cries and Whispers. The first is the doctor, David, who... four men. There's David, the doctor, who clearly has had an affair with Marie at one point. When he first appears, he goes to the dying Agnes's bedside. He touches her. He strokes her forehead. He's actually very comforting, and you get the impression that he's a good doctor, that he's a real healer, and that the fact that he can't do anything for...
He's the nature of hospice care.
That he can't do anything for Agnes is causing him suffering. And then there's this scene with Marie where they clearly just don't like each other. They might have had the hots for each other at one point, but he kind of presses her face to a mirror and describes how she's getting old and ugly. And you're sitting there looking at Lee Goldman and going,
There's no way that she's getting ugly and old, but you can see the point being made. She is aging.
But at the very end, she says, I think you're projecting yourself on me.
Right.
And you just go, and there's Erland Joseph, not a bad-looking man, but not Lee Goldman. And you just go, the same fear of death and mortality that we're all suffering from, but you're projecting that on a woman who you might have had a meaningful relationship with, and yet you can't. There are two scenes. I want to just call this out for people who pay attention to these sorts of details, where Karen is talking with her husband and Marie is talking with David, the doctor, her lover, and they're eating, and neither of the women eat or basically drink anything, and both of the men shovel food into their mouth as rapidly as they can. both of these scenes, and they're almost identical. That just unbelievable eating as quickly.
It's like watching The Simpsons consume dinner.
It's like watching Homer Simpson eat, right? How quickly can I consume this?
Yeah.
These two supposedly, sophisticated, aristocratic Swedish men who are shoveling food into their mouths like they're Kentucky trailer trash, and the women just sit there sort of nodding and watching them, and it's telling you that these men are basically driven by their appetites, and since they're not getting what they're not getting what they want, they're just going to consume. It makes men seem rather bestial, and I think the men in this film seem very weak and bestial compared to the women who are wrestling and trying to get an emotional connection, which they can't quite make.
So a point about that emotional connection, because at a certain point, Maria and Karen do have a kind of a breakthrough where they are finally able to literally look at one another in the eye, become physically close. They embrace after some moments when that's been difficult in previous scenes. But their conversation, which we can see, we don't hear it. Earlier you asked whether this movie can be considered a feminist text, and I know that it's easy to dress it up in various ways, but in the end it is made by a man who has the controlling interest as the writer, director, producer.
And there's been, for the life of this movie, which is, as I think we know, kind of considered one of the monuments of 20th century art film, it's been debated, what is Bergman's view about women, and is it feminist or not?
He's not particularly into the fellas. It could be it could be kind of anti-man, even if it's not championing the cause of fully rounded women. And I say that with some caution, because as I've experienced the movie, I don't feel very emotionally invested in anybody but Agnes, and she's a kind of giveaway because she's suffering. Suffering gets the stuff with me. I'm able to attach to that pretty quickly and pretty easily, whereas certain other emotional experiences, not so much. But all of the characters are kind of marking space as arguments in some ways. Each of them are like philosophical positions bumping into each other in wonderful clothing.
This is sometimes a criticism, not just of Bergman, but of other high art movies or plays or what have you, that the characters tend to become placeholders for philosophical positions rather than actual real life human beings, which they should be in a representational work of art. Do you think that that's true here? Do you not feel? Because I would urge, and I would say that all of the characters have sympathetic aspects to them, and I think you get to the end of Cries and Whispers.
Well, I feel it's easiest to attach to Anna, both because she's physical. I mean, she's capable of doing work. She touches people, in particular Agnes. She does the work of caring. But we also realize that she's the one character everybody else is going to punish. In the course of the movie, as it concludes, they're going to sell the ancestral home upon Agnes's death, and Anna will be cast into the future of who knows what without any guarantee of employment, and they're not going to give her a bonus to help set her on her way. She's cast off quite hostilely by the remaining family members, who in earlier scenes had been quite warm to her. But
she's given or she takes, because nobody else wants it, Agnes's diary.
She has some dignity in not craving physical things of value, but sentimental things of great value, but perhaps only to her.
Great psychological value, because Agnes is the only person, as far as we know in the film, who keeps a diary.
Yeah.
Because she's connected enough to her inner world that she wants to record her thoughts and write those down. And Anna, after Agnes has died, wants that testimonial, that remembrance of things past.
One problematic that I have in my mind about these movies and this pairing is the way that they both operate as horror movies. I think we're mutually agreed on that idea. And a nature of horror movies, at least in America, is the exploitation of the body in stress. That includes violence, but it also includes sensuality.
I just would like to interject here quickly. If no critic ever before has described Cries and Whispers as a horror movie, I personally want to get credit for that.
Yeah.
Because watching it and realizing that it was a horror movie, and that in fact lots of moments in Bergman's entire oeuvre are in fact horror movie like moments. That for me was a realization, and I think it's an interesting way to conceptualize and digest Cries and Whispers, and not think of it as just a boring psychological study, but actually a kind of Hitchcockian almost piece of psychological terror.
And still, there are these certain things that we now need to get to. and what we need to get to is, one, the exploitative and exciting and titillating use of full frontal in each of these movies.
Well, because it's not a horror movie if there aren't nude scenes.
It has to be somehow present. And the way that it's used in each of these movies is interestingly distinct. In The Stepfather, we watch Stephanie, the supposed to be 15 or 16-year-old teen, undress and shower for no reason whatsoever except to strip naked and go shower for the camera.
Man, opening scene of The Stepfather is Jerry in his proto-identity just before he becomes the Jerry that we are. He is with his original previous family. He has just butchered them. You see him looking at himself in the mirror with a beard and glasses, covered with blood. Then the next thing that you do, and it's a very dramatic moment, because I don't think that, there's Charlton Heston in Planet of the Apes. There are certain moments of male nudity, but it's not that common, especially in horror films, where
don't spend a lot of time looking at the male nudity.
Nudity is not important in a horror film, and in the very first scene of The Stepfather, he strips off his clothes. He's covered with blood. You see him fully. You see Terry O'Quinn totally nude from the backside,
and he gets Terry too.
And he gets it. He gets in and he showers off all the blood, and then he goes downstairs, and you catch in the background this absolutely horrific scene of a family butchered. You see it's in soft focus in the background, so you can't exactly see how horrible it is, but there's blood
everywhere.
There's blood everywhere. There are bodies strewn across a living room, and he's dressed in a suit and tie. He's shaved. He's transformed his identity, and he doesn't even look at it. He just walks right past this carnage that he's created, that he's walking away from. But this is after you've seen him strip nude and shower off. The next moment is before the beautiful young Jill Schoelen, who became known as a scream queen because apparently she's in a number of these B films. She has gotten home. She doesn't realize that her psychopath stepfather is lurking and has already beaten her mother senseless and thrown her in the basement. And she innocently strips off her clothes and gets into the shower, and it's very late in the film, so it's sort of surprising. Yeah, it's wonderful, and there are both of those framing moments where you realize what you should see. I am fine with gratuitous nudity. I'm all in favor of it. However, when it's effectively used in a film or on stage, it's because you want to see the human animal, because the first shower scene in Stepfather is right after a moment of unbelievable violence, and the second and final nude scene is precedes a moment of enormous violence and bloodiness. Yes, and so I think what he's saying there, what Joe Rubin, the very effective director of Stepfather, is saying there is, at a certain level, human beings we're just raw, naked animals, and we're going to respond to all kinds of urges, desires, and impulses that we don't necessarily have a lot of control over. So they're both very effective scenes, very surprising and shocking and visceral scenes, and I think they actually are totally not gratuitous. I think they give a lot of meaning to the movie.
Given what you're saying to me now, I'm having this quick symbolic read. Because the movie cannot be overtly pornographic, because after all, it was released to theaters and marketed at kids who were roughly my age when it came out, the way that the scene reads when Stephanie is disrobing and bathing is a come-on, just the way that Carol Glover, who wrote Men, Women, and Chainsaws, would describe You have to arouse the beast of the monster, Voorhees or Michael Myers, or in this case, Jerry, the stepfather, into a sexually excitable state in which they inflict violence. When Jerry is finally killed, he drops away from, I think it's Stephanie, who shoots him, as I recall, on a staircase.
She does.
Just as he releases his grip and rolls down the staircase to his death, or so we think until a sequel, he says to her, as some are wont to say after a mighty orgasm, "I love you." That all compares interestingly when we go backwards in time, 15 years from when Stepfather was released to when Cries and Whispers was released, which has this extraordinary scene when Karen...
Notorious. It's the scene that everybody talks about.
And it has to be addressed.
And that I think our listeners were probably waiting for us to discuss.
When are you fellas going to get to this? And the setup is Karen has been propositioned by her husband over dinner, who clearly wants to have sex with her. She's completely uninterested and needs to figure out some way to digest and manage all of that. And during dinner,
he's this utterly icy Swedish diplomat who you go is probably as unpleasant as any person you could ever hope to meet in real life. And you get why she totally would find the idea of sex with him repulsive.
And during dinner, she breaks a glass at the dinner table, which he consigns to, women have no control over their bodies, what a doofus, but we're still going to go hump. She takes a fragment of that glass and secretes it in her clothing, proceeds to go into their bedchamber where she begins to disrobe with Anna's help, and we have a scene of her fully revealed middle-aged body, including a C-section scar, as I recall, then putting on an evening gown and going into the bedchamber where her husband awaits her for their lovemaking, whereupon she reveals the fact that she's got this glass and she has been practicing a mix of masturbation and self-mutilation with glass that has bloodied her sex organ that she then uses to paint her face with her own blood in a hugely satisfying image of her isolation and joy.
It's shocking. It's gruesome. I can remember as a young man seeing this film with a bunch of other students at the University of Texas at Austin, and that was the first thing that we talked about after we walked out of the cinema, is this famous / notorious film. Watching it years later and being ready for the gruesomeness of the scene, one of the things that I was struck about is Ingrid Thulin, the great Swedish actress who plays Karen, that she thrusts this piece of broken glass into her genitals. She tosses her head back and she smiles.
Yes.
And she smiles, and I think it might be the first moment that you actually see Karen in the entire movie, and it's like more than halfway through. It might be the first moment that you see her smile.
She exhibits great pleasure
in having done this.
Right.
Yes.
And it's understood by all the filmmaking staff making the movie, those performers, that one in particular, and all of us in the audience, that this is an act we are not meant to ever perform. Self-mutilation, our genitals, is off the reservation.
You're not being encouraged to do that. Don't try this at home.
Right. When the camera pushes into her face and she takes her hand, which has been bloodied, smears it across her jowl, licks her lips, smiles, radiates a certain sort of, I'm gross but so self-satisfied towards her husband, which means she's done this for herself, but also to repel him and let him know, as she's letting us know, she doesn't care whatsoever. And usually, we're rigged to think of red as a hugely symbolic culture in all global civilizations, but in the West, we often assign it the value of erotic joy, of love, Valentine's Day, but also of fear and sinister things and evil. But also it's the color of blood. And there's a menstrual overlay with that from where the injury occurs. There is a hugely sexual component. There is a masturbatory component. There is a repulsion, a stop sign, a caution that's being waved. Because after all, her husband walks in the room in like his cigar robe, ready to hop on top of her and take his ease from her body. And she's made her body a vessel for her own repulsiveness.
He sees her as part of his world,
property.
Where he dominates everything.
Yeah.
She's one more piece of property. Exactly.
As a person who does a certain amount of film studies education, I've had students write about this movie, and they don't know how to talk about this scene. They don't know what words to use.
It makes you uncomfortable.
Right.
It's you still watch this scene, and I can imagine if I had been watching Cries and Whispers for the first time rather than the third time,
right,
I would cringe and find this really uncomfortable.
It is important to realize that this movie comes out in the United States within 6 months or so of The Godfather showing up and repapering the idea of what genre art movies can be in the American context. The spray of blood and the butchering of a horse's head of various human beings. The exploration of that kind of discretion.
The horse's head scene in The Godfather was a notoriously gonzo realistic moment.
And this scene in Cries and Whispers plays that way. This is not Argento spraying geysers of femoral blood. So, yeah, it's not that. It's a different kind of a value. And the other connection that is important, I think, for context, Last Tango in Paris was in theaters. But you could have walked down the street, let's just envision ourselves in Manhattan, near Christmas 72. You go watch the woman jabber a vagina, and then you can go watch this other guy do things with his anus.
Can I just say that this is... You know, we talk about the golden age of film, the golden age of television, and so forth. So this is a moment in, let's say, high-end cinema history where you can go and see Last Tango in Paris, The Godfather, and Cries and Whispers all at the same time. Well, that was a very good year to be a moviegoer.
Now, let me give you a few other things you could have seen the same week. You could also have gone to go see Across 110th Street, which is kick-ass. Blaxploitation, but without it being kind of awful. You could have gone to see Jeremiah Johnson.
Fine film. Yeah.
That handsome Redford up in the hills. You could have seen The Getaway, the original, before it was turned into something with Baldwin and Basinger. You could have seen Lady Sings the Blues, which is a minor kind of work, but it does announce a lot of different people who are prominent to popular culture, like Olzana's Raid is there in 1776, and The Mechanic and Sloop.
Robert Aldrich, such a fine revisionary Western.
And The Poseidon Adventure. All of these things is what a person could have pulled off the shelf the week that this movie was available in certain big American cities where it was a marketable thing.
I just have to say about The Poseidon Adventure, I rewatched it recently, and because I remember being a kid and just thinking that it was the essence of excitement and adventure, and it doesn't hold up. And I think it's partly because certain kinds of films are driven by special effects.
Yeah,
and we just don't have that anymore. Yeah.
So this, I suppose, brings us to something of a roughing conclusion, that we began this process of the High-Low Bro Show thinking about how we might slap together bad genre movie. In this case, I picked The Stepfather, and in the other realm of art house cinema, you picked Cries and Whispers, and we didn't know if there would be something to say to put these two movies in conversation. I think through these many minutes, we've discovered that there is a way that they can speak with one another. And so let me now ask, my pick was The Stepfather. What can you now say is a remarkable achievement of that movie?
I, first of all, want to say that I think value judgments almost always fade with time, and we often reconsider them. We often think that something is good, and we go back and look at it years later and go, that wasn't so good. We also often sometimes watch things that people like, and you don't respond to it for whatever reason, and then you go back and listen to it years later, and you go, this is much, much better than I thought. And now I realize why it's so highly regarded. Dude, I'm so totally at advantage in this contest because I think most of the highbrow films that we're going to choose are going to be blatantly great works of art, and that it's going to be hard to argue that they're great works of art. Having said that, I'm really interested in finding pieces of popular culture that I have not experienced before that move me in a certain way. And I would say this about the Stepfather is Joe Rubin's really, really tight, efficient direction. And, he keeps the story moving well without seeming jerky or helter-skelter. He cuts well quickly from scene to scene. You have attractive, interesting performers who give good, compelling performances. Terry O'Quinn, I think, has been widely celebrated for his performance. As I said, I think the slight problem, having now watched it twice in the last few weeks, is that it's just too obvious from the beginning that he's a psychopath. So that's a minor criticism. Jill Schoelen, beautiful young actress, and I'll probably go and watch a couple of her other B horror films. Gives a really affecting and engaging performances. And then there are a lot of other interesting kind of character studies, the psychologist who gets butchered, the reporter who's trying to help
the former brother-in-law.
The brother-in-law of the murdered family track down the psycho killer. Would I regard it as a masterpiece? No. Am I really glad that I watched it? Yes, I am. And I guess what I would say is a film like this tells me something about how to just think about a particular moment in American movie culture and think, what could you do with not a lot? You feel like you feel like Joe Rubin in this film doesn't have a lot to work with, and does everything that he possibly can, and does it really well. And so my hat's off to him. I think it's a well-crafted, well-made movie of its type, and I think anybody who cares about that particular genre of film should watch The Stepfather.
Well, let me respond to the same idea, because Cries and Whispers was your selection, and so what does Garrett think of Cries and Whispers? And so a personal narrative. When I was coming of age, I was in school in Los Angeles, and I would frequently go to the Virgin Megastore on Sunset Boulevard because there was an attached 4 or 6-plex movie theater that was art house. There was a place to buy records and CDs. There was a Yoshinoya beef bowl across the street.
The Virgin stores were
they were great.
They were meccas,
and they had listening posts for new albums. They even had viewing posts for new laser discs, and I had a laser disc player. And so while trolling their stash, their archive, building an understanding of what was available to me and all that I did not know because I was an ignorant young person, I kept bumping into this Criterion Collection thing, which of course now is its own channel. It's an operating going concern. But back then, it was a way you could get letterboxed versions of movies that weren't panned and scanned to fit a videotape, which was quite kind of extraordinary. And I was becoming a geeky film nerd kind of a guy. And the cover for Cries and Whispers, which was one of their earliest picks, as I recall.
And Criterion is the way that I think a lot of, especially younger viewers now, experience. I grew up, because I'm a bit older than you, I grew up in the age where there were repertory film houses.
You could go see them
You could go and see them, and they would do a different film every night, and they do series of directors. Now, if you want to see all or most of Godard, all or most of Truffaut, all or most of Fellini or Bergman, the Criterion Collection is the way that you do that.
And you have to run it down.
Yeah.
And they've done, over the years, they've amassed, I think several thousand titles in their body of work. Nonetheless, I can remember seeing this laser disc with the 4 women in white in this really nice looking field, which struck me as a very old-fashioned image, and thinking, this has no interest for me whatsoever. Why would a person like me want to see this movie? And so flash forward, years pass, and eventually we hatch this project and pull this one off the shelf. Okay, I have to get over my bad self and watch it. And the thing is, that image, as I think I alluded to before, has very little to do with the meat and potatoes of the movie's diegetic experience. It is the coda, as you referred to earlier, which is used to propagandize and sell people on seeing this movie. And it's not
the 4
really
women in white. It makes the film seem much more pleasant than it is. It looks like it's going to be an idyllic romp in the Swedish countryside, and not this nightmarish psychoterroristical encounter inside this enormous haunted mansion.
I figured I was going to watch lovely picnicking people hatch, match, and one will dispatch, because that's given to you is what the overall story is. And that's not what it is at all. So that was a reversal that at first bothered me, but I became so fixated on Agnes, the physical performance of that artist, her manipulation of her body, the way that she was able to open her mouth, and you could see her try to enunciate something that was not enunciatable. If I had seen this when I was that young man walking through the Virgin Megastore, I would not have understood really at all what was going on, and I would have been roundly disappointed, wishing I had watched Stepfather too. But now, as an older person, having observed different forms of suffering and in some mild ways experienced it myself, I can find that a lot of what it expresses wordlessly and imagistically is quite extraordinary. So that brings me to Nyqvist, the cinematographer. The dude knows what he's doing. Clearly, that's been the case for a very long time.
Won the Academy Award for Best Cinematography. A foreign cinematographer with a foreign film wins the Academy Award for Best Cinematography that year that Cries and Whispers is released.
It's rare to have that kind of attention lavished on a non-American movie, full stop, as you just expressed. But the thing about this movie, its nuances in making the color red have layers and depth and a tactile impression, is extraordinary. You see it draping all objects, you see it hanging from walls, you see everybody wearing it, and when you don't see it, it is an annotation to you, the viewer, that, well, something's going on, or else a fellow's walked in the room wearing a dark suit. And all of those layers of visual beauty, which I was prepared for because it is celebrated as a great image-making thing, is, I think, in service to reversed expectations about what a woman's story can be. Because the movie's parked in the past, I assume this must be the 1870s, 1880s, something like that, we're not thinking about applying contemporary mores from the United States to this circumstance of a Swedish mansion off out in wherever it's located. Instead, we're forced to deal with what we're meeting, which is an older time in an older place, and a lot of our aesthetic expectations, like fading out to black, fading up from white, chronological ordering, all of that has been thrown out. And you're forced to stand back on heel and determine, well, what exactly am I watching while a woman's dying constantly on screen throughout all of the sequences that she's involved with, while her sisters are these jumpy weirdos expressing all kinds of mixed guilt and passion, dispassion, excitement, and in that one memorable scene, masturbatory bliss at self-harm. It's an extraordinary thing to ball up into this one movie I so dramatically misread.
It's funny that you mentioned the Last Tango in Paris, which, now that I'm thinking about it in this context, is very similar in that the borderline between pleasure and pain, the connection between desire and repulsion, and the way in which the pursuit of pleasure and masochism and self-hatred and self-hurt are all connected. Both of those films are very much about that. That's a great connection to make, and I would hope that anybody who goes back and listening to this, watches Cries and Whispers, goes back and looks at Last Tango again, because I think that's
they're voicing
linkage.
Things.
Yes.
Yeah, they're in conversation.
Yeah.
So I suppose a final remark, which has nothing to do with what I just summarized, but it's just something that's always on my mind when I watch movies that are about violence, graphic bloodshed, suffering, horror movies, in other words. The performers who engage in those stories and play these parts we watch on screen spend a lot of the time that they are on screen covered in muck, whether that's the viscera of others they have dispatched or their friends and allies who've been slowly ground down by whatever villain is there. These performers portray themselves as these characters while wearing filth. I always end up catching myself partway through those narrative experiences thinking, they must really smell bad. They must be really oily. It's going to be hard to get that out of their hair, and so on and so on. And because Stepfather introduces us to the character we will know as Jerry, ridding himself all of that by bathing, only to then turn it out again by murdering more people, it strikes me always that the willingness to engage in the spectacle visually of watching people covered in viscera and blood and guts and suffering is entirely tolerable. But I know in my private life, when I mash my finger, as I did recently with a hammer, and bleed all over myself, it grosses me out and bothers me because it demonstrates how fragile I am, how much pain really does hurt and disrupt all of my capabilities. Whereas in movies, whether it's Karen in Cries and Whispers harming herself on purpose for her own weird kind of joy most of us wouldn't share in, we're nonetheless watching the spectacle of that visually and from a remove. And that, of course, in the end is a kind of joy of movies. We're not forced to engage in the multi-sense experience of what these story worlds are marching us through, as unpleasant as they can be, witness certain key moments in The Stepfather and certain key moments in Cries and Whispers, but yet we can access these heightened experiences of the human condition and get something from it.
And so do you think both of these films are, the relationship that I think you and I are both seeing with these two films is exactly that quality and power that they have of taking internal experiences and internal phenomenon, like, for instance, our bloodstream, and externalizing them.
Right.
Making us look at them. Making us try and consider that.
On occasion over the years, I've been asked to review somebody's script and give them some remarks or criticism. And usually it all divides down into your conception of a story is dumb, or you have written things that cannot be filmed. And you haven't figured out a way to cause
you're saying, you're trying to say it, but you're not showing it.
And without that capability, you've got nothing whatsoever. So by externalizing all of the passions that are externalized in Cries and Whispers, even the ones that are negative passions, the disinterest and the disaffection, the disgust one feels towards siblings and all of the rest, by making that a behavior we can watch, is a great thing. So that's what I'm taking from Cries and Whispers as my main. Put it on the shelf and dust it off periodically to review what I think of Bergman's masterwork.
What I come back to is both this process of making the interior exterior, which I think we see in both of these films. And one very important way that is done is by tearing down facades. And I use facades in the architectural sense. It's both of these.
Right,
both
about
of
houses.
these are about houses and the places that we live. Both films are about what's supposed to be ideal and wonderful, happy families where everyone is the family in Cries and Whispers. These three sisters, they live lives of incredible wealth and privilege, and by the time you get to the end of them, one of the sisters is dead, having died after terrible agony and suffering, and the other two are quite clearly totally miserable and psychologically messed up beyond belief, let's put that way, in very unhappy marriages. And then in The Stepfather, you have this man who poses as a real estate salesman, but who's actually looking for one family after another to butcher on the pretext that he wants to create a perfect family. Both films call into question the idea of whether that perfect, secure family life ever exists, and also whether or not you might turn the corner and suddenly get your throat slit.
High-Low Bro Show. Cries and Whispers and The Stepfather. Consensus opinion seems to be a person should go see it.
This is Richard, your high meister.
This is Garrett, the low meister.
We will post this on YouTube. We'll get an email address out there where you can mail us any kind of comments you have. We'd love to hear your suggestions about future pairings, any kinds of comments that you have about our very first inaugural episode. We'd love to get those from you, so please write us.